Let justice flow like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream. And that is, I want to see justice and righteousness on the earth.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're here in Washington at the Institute on Religion and Democracy, sitting here with Faith McDonnell, who leads the Religious Liberty Program there. Faith, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be with you.
Now, Faith, we're going to talk about, of course, folks, the state of religious liberty around the world and where things are at, where it's heading, and the different problems that religious liberty is facing. Now, Faith, if you were to tell us the general picture of the world and religious liberty, how would you describe the current state of it?
Well, I would say that the state of religious liberty around the world is not good right now. Not good at all. I hate always being the skunk at the garden party, but that's my job, to talk about the suffering and the oppression that people go through because of their faith. And right now, the largest group of people that are being persecuted around the world are Christians, but there is religious persecution of all different minority faiths as well. And we work mostly on the Christian issue because it's so big and because the Bible mandates for Christians do good to all, but especially to those who are of the household of faith, so that I feel that is my mandate. But it's a problem everywhere. It's a problem because evil exists in the world, and people who don't want people to have religious freedom are making sure that they don't.
Yeah, well, I know. Actually, we've spoken before. We met recently at the Stop the Steal rally. Specifically, the event for designating the Chinese Communist Party a transnational criminal organization, and of course, you were there with the Muslim Uyghurs, supporting them, and there were also other religious groups represented. And so I've seen you publicly representing and calling for the end of persecution of many different religions.
Yes, that's true. That rally was mostly sponsored by the Uyghur from East Turkestan, and I have been working with them because what is going on with the labor camps in China is so horrific, and especially the fact that groups, organizations like Apple and Nike and all of those are letting them get away with it for the almighty dollar. So this is definitely a problem. The Falun Gong, I've spoken at the rallies for Falun Gong, and the heartbreaking, outrageous situation of the harvesting of organs of people who are prisoners of faith. And, you know, I got my start working with persecuted Christians in China when there were official churches and unregistered churches. Now the Chinese government is going against both of those.
This is right.
Yeah. And outrageous things like changing the Bible to make it more CCP friendly, and not allowing children to go to church at all until they're 18. So this is a big problem. I also focus on Nigeria because of the massive slaughter reaching the point of genocide of Christians in northern and central Nigeria by both Boko Haram and the Fulani. And I've worked for years on Sudan and South Sudan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria. You know, my job is not very many laughs in it.
Yeah, well, you know, I've actually done reports before at the Epoch Times talking about actually the persecution of Christians in the Middle East has been designated a genocide.
Yes,
and
we fought hard for that designation.
Oh,
too.
you're part of that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it's incredible that I think almost no media covered the fact that a genocide was taking place, a designated genocide.
Yeah. Well, the same thing. We had to fight like crazy to get Boko Haram designated as a foreign terrorist organization. It took 3 years to do that during the Obama administration with Secretary Clinton. And one of the biggest problems that I see in all these areas is that there are false narratives that spring up, that the left and others don't want to look at truth, so they make these false narratives. Right now, the false narrative in Nigeria is that there's a clash between the farmers and the herdsmen, you know, and it's just such a lie because there's so much more going on. And So I try to counter false narratives wherever I can, whether they be in this country or other countries.
So what's the true narrative on that issue?
The true narrative is that there is a jihad going on against Christians in Nigeria, that groups like Boko Haram and the Fulani would like to see Nigeria be a completely Islamic state, a caliphate. And even the president of Nigeria, who's Fulani himself, is doing nothing to protect the Christians. So that's why I'm so happy that during the Trump administration, there have been so many advances for international religious freedom that were never done before.
Now, Faith, in terms of I want to go into some of the political side of this too, but in terms of the cultural side, you mentioned there's this media kind of blockade on information. And it's ironic because a lot of these same news outlets are the ones talking about tolerance and peace and harmony and globalism, but they turn a blind eye to actual serious religious oppression to the point of genocide and really horrific crimes. What's your perception on why they have these dueling narratives where they say one thing and then cover up the other side of it?
That's a great question, and I think it's multifaceted. I think that they have dueling loyalties themselves. You know, they have loyalties to groups that have money, Chinese Communist Party maybe. They have all kinds of problems with people of faith who believe in a level of morality that they don't believe in anymore. So it's easy to say, well, you know, if those people would just, you know, stick with the religion that they were, for instance, people who convert from Islam to Christianity, if they had just stayed what they were, they wouldn't be persecuted. So why should I feel sorry for them? Some people are like that, some media people are like that. There's also the idea that they need to go along with the culture, and the culture keeps changing, and if you don't go along with the culture, then you're a throwback, and we're not going to focus on you as much. So, you know, we have had the problem with Christians in Africa who believe in the Bible and believe in the biblical version of human sexuality of men and women, and who believe that children should not be aborted. So there have been both media people and government people in past administrations who therefore had kind of a cavalier attitude towards them.
Yeah, actually, I spoke with an individual. You introduced me to this African doctor who was saying this as well, that the media is turning a blind eye to the genocide taking place in Africa. Do you think it's then because that they disagree with the morals of religion, and so they're turning a blind eye to actual genocide? Is this the case?
I think that's a big part of it. I think, you know, Africa also, you know, for these people who talk about racism all the time, they don't seem to care about racism in Africa. In fact, a friend of mine who was a former slave in Sudan, Francis Bach, he escaped when he was 17 years old and became kind of our campaign director for helping free slaves in Sudan back in the late 90s and early 2000s. He just wrote an article in Stream magazine and talked about the fact that if Black Lives Matter, why don't you care about the lives of the people in Nigeria right now who are not only being persecuted and killed, but are being abducted and made into slaves? Or the people in Libya who are being sold on an open market that you could even watch on, I think it was NBC News, and yet people are not as concerned about that. So that's another big problem. That do you really care about Black people if they're Africans and if they don't have the same morality you do?
Now, Faith, in terms of the political landscape, you talked, for example, about your efforts during the Obama administration, Trump administration now. How have you seen these two administrations handling religious persecution?
Well, I'll say this, Josh. I have never seen as much of an effort and as many successes in advancing international religious freedom as I have in the Trump administration. When I came to IRD, it was the Clinton administration. Then it was the Bush administration, and I was very grateful to President Bush for what he did for Sudan. Then the Obama administration, and now this has been remarkable. President Trump allowed there to have a very strong international religious freedom emphasis in his administration. We've had the ministerials on international religious freedom that we never had before. You know, we had 2 in the United States that the State Department put on. This year we had the virtual one in Poland, and you know, I don't know what will happen in the future, but I'm hopeful that we will continue to have those ministerials. And we've had an international religious freedom ambassador in Sam Brownback, who has done great things as well. We've had executive orders on international religious freedom from President Trump. We've had his speech at the UN talking about religious freedom and particularly about the persecution of Christians. So there have just been so many things that have gone on that I, for one, am grateful to God for President Trump, for all the things he has done for persecuted believers around the world.
I know when it comes to the media narratives, he's framed as a racist and these types of things, but as a journalist, I've observed that he did pass legislation that designated, put sanctions on Chinese government officials and businesses for persecution of Muslims,
yes,
persecution of Falun Gong, persecution of democracy activists in China. The people carrying out these persecutions have faced sanctions. Mm-hmm. And I know in this country as well, one of the big concerns is this encroachment of socialism. Mm-hmm. And we see now some of the same types of light religious persecution happening here, such as, for example, using the virus to restrict people's ability to worship. Are you also paying attention to the issues domestically here in the U.S.?
Yes, I am, because I have to, because they're connected to what happens in the world. If we lose our freedom here, it's bad for the whole world. There's an African proverb that says, when the U.S. sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. Well, now that's very true in terms of international religious freedom. And with our freedoms being restricted, we need to look outwards at the countries that have fought so hard to keep their freedom or to get their freedom back. In 2019, I was in Budapest, Hungary, at a conference on international Christian persecution that the government of Hungary put on, because they understand and they don't want to go back to socialism or communism. There I went to the Museum of Terror, the House of Terror, that was first the home to the Nazis and then the home to the Stasi, and saw the things that were going on. And I don't want my country to have to someday build a museum of terror to show what happened to our country. So I am going to be fighting for religious liberty. Regardless of what happens, I believe we will be fighting for religious liberty with good help in the years to come. I won't say any more than that, but you can just nudge, nudge, wink, wink on that one. But I believe that this is very important, that we keep our freedom, that we keep going to church. The socialists and communists want to put a mask on religious believers. They want to muffle the voices. There are stories in the Bible about the people who wanted to stop the voice of God coming through people like his prophets, and what happened to them, like Jezebel, who was pushed out a window by God's people, who would not allow that stifling to take place. And there are those spirits around in the world today who want to stop freedom and democracy and the ability to worship. So we have an obligation to stand and not to be cowards, and to speak out and to continue to work for and to pray. I think that prayer is the most important thing that we do, but people lose that when you're not allowed to go to church. Even with that, though, we have seen that what evil and Satan meant for evil, God uses for good, because people from all over the world are turning into church services who would never set foot in a church. So I think that that is a real blessing, but that can't be it. We have to be the called out ones that God is going to use to bring peace and flourishing of humanity on the earth, and to stop these regimes like the Communist Party in China.
Now, you mentioned socialism briefly, and of course with Crossroads we talk about this often. There's really a battle in the world between freedom and socialism.
Yes.
And going back to Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto, they talk about communism's goals of destroying all religion and all morality, eliminating the family and destroying religious institutions. And with socialist regimes, we see the carrying out of this, that it's oftentimes one of the first targets are the religious believers.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people concerned that this is now happening in America to an extent. Do you also see this battle between freedom and socialism as something that impacts religious liberty?
I see it, yeah, as a very, very serious problem. For instance, Black Lives Matter comes straight out of the Communist Party and out of socialism. And young people in America who say they think socialism's a good thing, who don't understand, who maybe should go to that House of Terror in Budapest, or go to North Korea, or see something like that, because they don't have a clue what's going on and what it will mean to them. They think right now that socialism is, making sure everybody gets enough food and, has a car and all those things. They don't know that it means taking away your freedom. And so this is very important for international religious freedom, and very important for the freedom in this country.
Now, Faith, a lot of the ways that the socialist movements and the media, unfortunately, tries to frame religious movements, and especially ones calling for the end of religious persecution, as being isolated, oftentimes even being like racist or so on. I've personally seen you standing next to people of many different races and of many different beliefs. In terms of how this is framed, what would you tell people? What do you represent? What does this movement represent?
For me, it represents my call from God. And God is a God who loves people of all races. He created all races. He likes it that there are people of different races. And that's what I believe too. And it's about truth. It's about truth and freedom and love for people, and a strong sense of justice. I mean, people have said to me, you're so loving and everything. They don't know about my justice side, and that I hope that the ones who are perpetrating it get what's coming to them, unless, of course, they repent. But if not, they need to get what's coming to them. And I look for the day when all of the wrongs will be righted and there will be justice. And, it says in the Bible, let justice flow like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream. And that is, I want to see justice and righteousness on the earth.
Faith, real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be with you.